Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing something, well, a little bit different.
Very different, yeah.
Usually, when we pull a file on a sci-fi civilization or some massive historical empire, we're looking for the fireworks.
Right, the drama.
Exactly. We want the rise and fall, the massive wars, the technological singularities. We're sort of conditioned to look for the explosions.
We want the action movie version of history.
Right. But today, we are looking at a document, specifically PDF 008. It's titled Society, Caste Order, and Daily Life of the Antarana. And it describes the exact opposite of fireworks.
It really does.
We're looking at a society that basically successfully did nothing for a very long time.
Well, did nothing is maybe a bit unfair to them.
Fair enough.
I'd say we're looking at a society that successfully avoided dying, which, given where they live, is a massive achievement.
Yeah, that's a much better way to put it. So set the stage for us. We're stripping away the myths today and just looking at the operating system of the Antarana civilization. Where exactly are we?
So we are on Antares, and to understand this document, you really have to understand the geography of the place.
The environment.
Right. This is a post-collapse world. The history books tell us that the lush, Earth-like version of this planet is long gone. It was destroyed by the hubris of their ancestors.
So what's left?
What's left is an arid, unforgiving desert.
So all the luxury is just gone.
Completely gone. The Antarana are living in scattered oases, and they're surrounded by endless dunes. It's a harsh environment where one mistake...
Like wasted reservoir or something.
Exactly. One bad harvest, one wasted reservoir. It doesn't mean an economic recession. It means extinction.
And I think that's the central thesis of this deep dive today, right? That the environment didn't just shape their architecture, it literally shaped their psychology.
It shaped absolutely everything. The document describes their civilization as a coherent, self-sustaining whole. We tend to think of society as a mix of competing interests. Right. Businesses versus government, the individual versus the collective.
Huh?
But on Antares, there is zero margin for that kind of friction. Biology, culture, daily habits, they're all engineered for one specific outcome. Equilibrium.
Equilibrium, which sounds great, on a motivational poster. But when you dig into the internal operating system, as I like to call it, it gets pretty radical.
It does.
The first thing that really hit me in the text is their legal system. Or rather, the total lack of one.
Yeah, that's a shock to modern readers. If you walked into an Antarana settlement looking for a courthouse or a police station, you wouldn't find them.
Which sounds like total anarchy. How do you stop people from stealing or hurting each other without laws?
You substitute external enforcement with internalized culture? The text explains that they don't rely on a written list of thou shalt nots.
Right, no penal code?
Exactly. Instead, they rely on what they call the 4 pillars. And these aren't just, nice values taught in a civics class. They are survival metrics programmed into them basically from birth.
Let's break those down because they really are the code this whole software runs on. The first one is balance.
But not work-life balance like we think of it today. To them, balance is a strict equation. It is the interplay between the individual, the community, and the planet.
And the document is very specific here.
Extremely specific. You cannot prioritize one variable without crashing the whole system. If the individual takes too much, the community suffers. If the community expands too aggressively, the planet breaks.
It's basically systems thinking applied to morality.
Precisely. It's an engineering mindset applied to social behavior.
Okay, then we have the second pillar, which is responsibility. And this one struck me as very anti-modern.
How so?
Well, in our society, we are intensely focused on rights. What am I owed? What is my right to free speech, to own property, to consume? The Antarana seem to completely flip that script.
They absolutely do. The text explicitly says responsibility is placed above personal claim. They focus heavily on what is owed to the whole.
So no personal freedom.
It's not that they don't have freedom, but freedom is strictly secondary to the survival of the oasis. If your personal freedom endangers the water supply, your freedom is revoked. Simple as that.
Wow. Okay, the third pillar is knowledge as duty. And I think this is my favorite one.
It's a fascinating concept. In our world, knowledge is usually a commodity. You learn a highly specialized skill to get a better job, to make more money, to gain status.
Right. You own it. It's intellectual property.
Yes, exactly. But to the Antarana, hoarding knowledge is seen as a literal form of theft.
Really?
Yes. If you know how to fix a water filtration system better than anyone else and you don't share that method with the community, you are actively harming the group. Knowledge is an obligation. You learn so that you can serve the system.
That is profound. And the last one, the fourth pillar, is probably the hardest pill to swallow for us: restraint.
Restraint is the firewall against the old Anterran mindset. The text describes restraint specifically regarding power, growth, and intervention.
Sort of a just because we can doesn't mean we should philosophy.
Precisely. And this is where we have to remember the context. This isn't some utopian commune where everyone just magically decided to be nice.
Right.
This culture was built on severe trauma. They look back at their history, at the total collapse of their biosphere, and they recognize that unchecked growth killed them. So restraint isn't about being humble or modest. It's a strict survival mechanism to stop them from destroying themselves all over again.
It's like a recovering addict who knows they can never ever take that first drink again.
That is a very apt analogy. They are a civilization in permanent recovery.
Okay, so that is the philosophy. But philosophy doesn't clean the water filters. We need to talk about how they actually organize their labor. We need to talk about the caste system.
Yes. A very loaded word.
Extremely loaded. When you or I hear the word caste, we think of oppression. We think of people stuck at the bottom, unable to move, basically serving the people at the top. But PDS-008 is incredibly defensive about this distinction.
It is. The document goes out of its way to create a clear boundary between a hierarchy and a functional division. They claim this is absolutely not about some humans being inherently better or more worthy than others.
It's just division of labor.
Right. It's based entirely on aptitude and planetary needs. It is not a corporate ladder you climb. It's a body you are part of.
Let's dissect the organs of this body then. Who is actually doing the physical work?
We should start with the preservers. In a desert world, these are your absolute VIPs. They are the caretakers of the ecology. They maintain the oases, the life veins of water, the agriculture.
But the text makes them sound like more than just farmers. They sound almost like field biologists.
They essentially are. They monitor pH levels, soil composition, moisture retention. Look, if the preservers fail, everyone in the settlement dies in about 3 days. They are the frontline defense against the desert.
Got it. Then you have the shapers.
The architects, urban planners, and engineers. But again, you have to apply that pillar of restraint here.
No vanity projects.
Exactly. They aren't building towering skyscrapers to stroke their egos. They are adapting infrastructure to the environment. A shaper's job is to build a house that cools itself naturally without electricity, or a road that doesn't disrupt the natural sand migration.
Makes sense. Then we have the researchers.
Scientists, but with a very tight leash.
A leash.
A conceptual leash, yes. They develop technology, but strictly under balanced constraints. Think about our own history. If we invented the internal combustion engine, we just built it and used it.
Okay.
We figured out the pollution part a century later.
Right. Act first, apologize later.
But an Antarana researcher has to ask, if we deploy this tech today, what is the ecological impact in 500 years? If the answer is we don't know, or it's bad, the technology is completely scrapped.
I mean, by our standards, that completely stifles innovation.
Absolutely. By our standards, it's paralyzing. By their standards, it prevents planetary suicide. They argue that innovation without foresight is just sheer recklessness.
Fair enough. Next on the list are the mediators.
They are the nervous system of the society. They handle all communication and conflict resolution. They ensure the preservers and the shapers aren't stepping on each other's toes. They're the glue holding the disparate parts together in harmony.
And finally, the keepers of knowledge. We've touched on them briefly in other deep dives, but here we really see their day-to-day societal function.
The archivists. Yep. But they do much more than just dust off old books. They actively control the dissemination of dangerous information. They are the ones tasked with remembering the old ways specifically so those mistakes are never repeated.
They are the institutional memory.
Yes.
Now here's the burning question for anyone listening. If I am born a preserver, am I just stuck planting desert moss until the day I die?
According to the text, mostly yes, but not entirely. Switching castes is rare, but it is possible.
But not just because you're ambitious and want a promotion.
Exactly. You don't switch because you want a cooler job title or a corner office. You switch based on maturity and communal need. If a preserver demonstrates a profound natural aptitude for mediation, the society might carefully move them into the mediator caste.
But it's a slow transition.
Very slow. The key takeaway regarding the castes is that there is no ruling caste. The keepers don't dictate orders to the preservers. The shapers don't command the mediators.
It functions much more like a circle than a pyramid.
Exactly. Every single role is critical to the survival of the whole structure.
But someone has to actually decide things. If a massive sandstorm destroys the main aqueduct, who signs the work order? Who makes the final call?
And this brings us to what is probably the most frustrating part of their society for a modern human to grasp: the architecture of decision-making.
Frustrating is definitely the right word. The text mentions a cultural allergy to quick decisions.
Yes. In Antarana culture, speed is highly suspicious. A fast decision is viewed as a genuinely dangerous decision because it implies you haven't taken the time to weigh all the long-term consequences.
So how do they rebuild that destroyed aqueduct?
Through a highly structured, multi-stage consensus. The shapers have to design it, the preservers have to officially sign off on the ecological impact, the researchers have to verify the sustainability of the materials, the mediators have to ensure the whole community is comfortable with the labor required.
That sounds agonizingly slow. What if people are dying of thirst? What if it's an emergency?
The text implies they have a clear distinction between a crisis response, which is heavily rehearsed and immediate, and strategic change.
Yeah.
But for anything new or structural, they grind it out. They would genuinely rather wait a full year to build a protective wall than build it in a week and find out later that it blocks a vital wind current that cools the entire city.
It's the old measure twice, cut once philosophy, but taken to the extreme. Measure 1,000 times, cut once.
And this ties directly into how they view power. This was perhaps the most profound part of the document for me personally. They view power as an inherently unstable tool.
Almost like it's radioactive.
Yes, exactly. In our world, power is the ultimate prize. You campaign for it, you fight for it, you hoard it. On Antares, authority is seen as a heavy burden. They refer to it as stewardship. If you are designated as a lid, a temporary leader, you are not a king. You are simply the person forced to carry the heaviest backpack for the group.
And everyone knows you're only carrying it for a few miles.
That's the beauty of it. You carry the burden, you do your duty to the community, and then you happily pass it off to someone else. There is no career politician class. They fundamentally believe that if you hold power for too long, you inevitably become corrupt. So rotation of authority is strictly enforced.
All right, so we have the structure, we understand the philosophy and the castes, but I want to know what it actually feels like to be there. If I drop you, the listener, into the middle of an Antarana oasis, what are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Close your eyes and imagine the desert heat. Outside the oasis, it's totally oppressive, but then you step into the settlement. The very first thing you notice is the rhythm of the place. The text describes their daily life as cyclical.
So no 9-to-5 daily grind.
Not at all. They don't fight the daylight. They work when it's cool in the early morning and the late evening. The brutal midday heat is reserved for rest, for study, and for social interaction. Work and life aren't rigidly separated into office hours and personal freedom. They are seamlessly integrated.
Give me an example of a day.
You might repair a wind trap in the early morning, teach a small class of children at noon, and then meditate or discuss philosophy in the evening.
And I'm looking around for the technology. I know they have advanced ships, which we'll get to, but the text explicitly says their cities are not cyberpunk neon hubs.
No, not at all. The technology is described as leashed and ambient. It is definitely there. They have incredibly advanced composite materials, near-perfect water reclamation, massive data storage, but it's hidden. It blends perfectly into the natural stone and the sand. You don't see glowing screens everywhere. You don't see people walking around glued to personal devices.
Because that level of distraction would disrupt the balance.
Exactly. Technology is designed to silently support life. It is never allowed to replace or dominate it.
And how do they learn to live like this? How do you take a naturally chaotic human toddler and turn them into a Zen master of equilibrium?
Education. But absolutely not school as we currently know it. The text says education is a lifelong distributed process that starts primarily with observation.
So before they learn to do anything, they just learn to see.
Yes. A child will spend years simply observing how the ecological and social systems interact before they are ever allowed to touch a specialized tool. You don't specialize into a caste until you deeply understand the whole picture. The goal of their education system isn't to produce an efficient worker bee. The goal is to produce a citizen who can self-regulate.
That specific phrase keeps coming up in the text. Self-regulate. It's almost like the entire society is designed so you don't need a policeman standing on the corner because the policeman is already inside your head.
Or rather, the community is in your head. You fully understand the downstream consequences of your actions, so you govern your own behavior naturally.
But come on. They are still biological organisms. They still have egos and pride. They must fight. I refuse to believe everyone just holds hands and gets along all the time.
The document actually addresses this explicitly. It asks, Do they fight? And the answer is yes. Conflict is seen as inevitable, but they view the nature of conflict entirely differently than we do.
It's not a wrestling match with a clear winner.
No. To us, conflict is adversarial. I win, you lose. I'm right, you're wrong. To the Antarana, conflict is simply a signal of imbalance. It's a red warning light on the dashboard of the society. The goal of any dispute resolution isn't to punish someone or declare a victor. The only goal is restoration of equilibrium.
Okay, but what if I am an Antarana citizen and I have a truly radical, disruptive idea? What if I stand up in the square and say, hey, let's drill for deep oil and build a giant tower to the moon? Do they arrest me?
No. They don't. And this is where their system gets a little chilling, frankly. They don't use violence or imprisonment, they use isolation.
Explain how that works.
They simply deprive the radical idea of oxygen. If an idea fundamentally threatens the balance of the oasis, the community just doesn't engage with it. They won't fund it. They won't argue about it. They socially isolate the individual pushing it until that individual realizes they are completely out of sync with the survival of the group.
It's essentially weaponized indifference.
That's a great way to phrase it. It acts like an immune system response. The disruptive idea just withers and dies because it has no cultural soil to grow in. It is incredibly effective, but to a modern individualist, it sounds pretty terrifying.
It's subtle, it's effective, and yes, it terrified me a little bit reading it. Now, we have to talk about the spiritual side of this culture, because usually when you look at a historical society that is this cohesive and stable, there is a god sitting at the very top of the pyramid.
And here, there isn't. There are no priests, no towering temples, and no rigid dogma.
But they do constantly talk about the flame.
They do. But you have to understand the nuance of how they view it. The flame is the actual planetary core. It is the literal geothermal energy source that keeps their fragile biosphere alive. They respect it immensely as the source of all life, but they do not worship it as a conscious deity. They don't pray to the geology of the planet.
So it's more of a secular spirituality.
It's deeply internalized. Their existential and spiritual needs are met through quiet philosophy, through the ritualized observation of natural cycles, and through that profound sense of connection to the whole. They don't need a priest to tell them they are part of something bigger. They see it literally every single time they drink a reclaimed glass of water.
And finally, we should briefly mention space, because we do know from earlier records that the Antarana eventually do leave the planet and travel the stars.
They do, but even their approach to space travel is a perfect reflection of this grounded culture.
It wasn't some grand invasion fleet looking for conquest.
Not at all. It wasn't conquest, and it wasn't even an escape in the sense of abandoning a dying ship. They referred to it merely as extending the living space. Their ships are meticulously designed for incredible longevity, for silence, and for minimal ecological interference wherever they go. They treat the rest of the galaxy the exact same way they treat their fragile oases, with extreme caution and deep respect.
They intentionally made sure they didn't become an invasive species.
Exactly. They packed up their equilibrium and they brought it with them into the dark.
So let's synthesize this and bring it home. We've looked at the 4 pillars, the functional castes, the agonizingly slow community meetings, the quiet rhythm of the desert. Why does this matter to you, the listener? What can we actually take away from studying a society on an arid planet?
I think it matters deeply because it is a masterclass in intentionality.
How do you mean?
Look at our own world today. A lot of our massive systems, our global economy, our sprawling cities, the internet, they just kind of happened. They grew wild and unchecked. The Antarana show us what it looks like when you design a civilization backward from a single unyielding goal. And that goal was simply do not burn out.
They built the ultimate anti-burnout civilization.
They really did. They recognized through hard experience that unchecked growth and unchecked ambition behave exactly like a cancer. So they engineered a permanent chemotherapy regimen into the very fabric of their daily lives.
It really completely challenges our modern definition of progress, doesn't it? We inherently define progress as more speed, more stuff, more power, more territory.
And that leads perfectly to the final provocative thought I would leave with you. We have just spent this time detailing a society where power is viewed as a toxic burden, where fast is synonymous with stupid or dangerous, where you don't even own the rights to your own knowledge.
It is the absolute inverse of the American dream.
It is. So here's the question you have to ask yourself. In a world designed exactly like that, what happens to human ambition? Can a sentient being, or an Antarana, be truly fulfilled and happy without that burning internal desire to be better or richer than their neighbor? Or is stability, is achieving perfect equilibrium actually the ultimate form of evolution?
Is choosing to stay exactly the same the hardest thing a species can possibly do?
It very well might be.
That is a very heavy thought to end on. We're going to officially close the archives on PDF 008 for today. A truly fascinating look at a society that looked at the rat race, decided to stop running, and just started balancing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure. Keep thinking out there.
See you next time.